When a narcissist hurts someone who gave them everything, something happens that can be difficult to explain to people who have never lived through an emotionally confusing relationship. You may have given your patience, your loyalty, your understanding, your forgiveness, your time, your energy, your attention, and sometimes pieces of yourself that you never thought you would have to sacrifice. You may have stayed when leaving would have been easier. You may have listened when nobody listened to you. You may have defended them when others questioned their behavior. You may have made excuses for things that hurt you because you believed there was something underneath the behavior that you could reach. And then one day, perhaps slowly or perhaps all at once, you realized something devastating. The person you gave everything to could still hurt you, as though everything you gave meant nothing. That realization can break something inside you. But listen carefully, because this is where your healing begins. Their ability to hurt you does not mean your love was worthless. Their inability to appreciate what you gave does not mean you gave too much. And their failure to treat you with care does not prove that you were foolish for caring. Sometimes the most painful relationships teach you the most important truth of your life. Love cannot compensate for a persistent lack of reciprocity, and sacrifice cannot create emotional safety where another person is unwilling or unable to participate in creating it. You need to understand something before we go any further. Not every difficult, selfish, emotionally unavailable, or hurtful person has narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissism exists on a spectrum, and only a qualified professional can diagnose a personality disorder. So when we talk about narcissistic behavior, we are talking about patterns that can include entitlement, an intense need for admiration or validation, low empathy, manipulation, exploitation, defensiveness, blame shifting, or difficulty tolerating criticism and accountability. These patterns can appear differently from person to person. But if you have been living inside a relationship where you repeatedly felt diminished, confused, blamed, emotionally neglected, or manipulated, you do not need a diagnostic label to take your pain seriously. You can recognize the pattern without becoming obsessed with the label. Your healing does not depend upon proving what is wrong with them. Your healing begins when you become willing to understand what happened to you and what you need now. The first thing that can happen when a person who gave everything is hurt by someone displaying strong narcissistic patterns is that they experience a profound collapse of expectations. This is different from ordinary heartbreak. In ordinary heartbreak, you may grieve the end of something that was painful but understandable. In a highly manipulative relationship, however, you may find yourself grieving two realities at the same time. You are grieving the person you thought they were, and you are grieving the future you imagined with them. You are not only asking, "Why did they hurt me?" You are asking, "How could everything I did not matter?" You may replay conversations at 3 in the morning. You may examine old messages. You may remember the moments when they seemed loving and compare them with the moments when they were cruel. You may think, if I had communicated differently, maybe this would not have happened. You may wonder whether you were too sensitive, too demanding, too emotional, or somehow responsible for the entire collapse. This is where psychological confusion can become so powerful. When affection and rejection alternate, your mind may keep searching for a consistent explanation because the human brain naturally tries to make sense of contradictions. You might remember the person who once looked at you as though you were the most important person in the world. Then you remember the coldness. You remember the compliments. Then you remember the criticism. You remember the promises. Then you remember the broken promises. You remember the moments when they needed you desperately. Then you remember how quickly they dismissed your needs. This inconsistency can create what is often called intermittent reinforcement, where positive experiences occur unpredictably among painful ones. That unpredictability can make attachment stronger, not healthier. You may become focused on getting back to the good version of the relationship. You begin waiting for the next apology, the next loving message, the next affectionate moment, the next sign that perhaps they finally understand. And because the reward is unpredictable, your mind may become even more preoccupied with obtaining it. This does not mean you are weak. It means you are human. But understanding the mechanism can help you stop blaming yourself. The second thing that can happen is that you begin questioning the value of your own generosity. You might say, I gave everything. I was loyal. I was patient. I supported them. I forgave them. Why wasn't that enough? But there is a painful truth you must learn. Your goodness cannot guarantee another person's goodness toward you. Your loyalty cannot force another person to become loyal. Your empathy cannot automatically produce empathy in someone else. Your willingness to communicate cannot make someone else willing to communicate honestly. Your forgiveness cannot manufacture accountability, and your sacrifice cannot create reciprocity in someone who has learned to receive without giving back. This is not a criticism of your heart. It is a lesson about where you place your heart. Perhaps you spent years believing that if you could just love them correctly, everything would eventually settle down. You became more patient. You explained yourself more carefully. You apologized, even when you were not completely sure you had done anything wrong. You tried not to trigger them. You became careful with your words. You studied their moods. You learned when to speak and when to remain silent. You started anticipating their reactions before they happened. You became an emotional weather forecaster in your own relationship. And eventually, you may have realized that you were spending enormous amounts of energy managing their emotions while neglecting your own. That is a major warning sign. A relationship should not require one person to constantly regulate the emotional environment for another person while their own emotional needs disappear. The third thing that can happen is that the narcissistic dynamic may intensify when you begin asking for accountability. As long as you are giving, accommodating, forgiving, and accepting the explanation they offer, the relationship may feel relatively stable to them. But the moment you say, "This hurt me," something can change. The moment you say, "I need you to take responsibility," you may encounter defensiveness. The conversation may suddenly become about your tone. Your reaction may become the problem. Your memory may be questioned. The original issue may disappear beneath accusations about everything you have supposedly done wrong. This can be a form of blame shifting. Again, not every defensive response is narcissistic, and everyone can become defensive sometimes. But when accountability is consistently avoided and responsibility is repeatedly redirected toward you, it becomes a serious relational pattern. Imagine saying, "You disappeared for 3 days and didn't tell me what was happening. That hurt me." Instead of hearing your concern, they respond, "You're always needy. You're impossible to deal with. You never appreciate anything I do." Suddenly, you are defending your personality instead of discussing their behavior. You started with one specific concern and ended up defending your entire character. This is how emotional conversations can become exhausting. The issue keeps moving. You cannot solve a problem that keeps changing shape. And if every attempt to address their behavior results in an attack against your character, eventually you may stop speaking altogether. That silence can be misunderstood. From the outside, people may think you are becoming distant. They may say, "Why don't you just communicate?" But they may not understand that you have communicated. Perhaps you communicated repeatedly. Perhaps you explained the same pain in 10 different ways. Perhaps you used kindness, patience, logic, vulnerability, tears, boundaries, and even silence. Sometimes the problem is not that you have failed to communicate. Sometimes the problem is that communication cannot produce accountability in someone who is unwilling to face their behavior. This is where you must stop measuring your worth by their response. If someone does not value what you gave, that does not make what you gave worthless. Imagine giving a beautiful book to someone who cannot read. The inability to appreciate the book does not determine its value. Or imagine playing a beautiful piece of music for someone who refuses to listen. Their refusal to hear it does not make the music meaningless. Your love was real because you experienced it. Your kindness was real because you chose it. Your loyalty was real because you lived it. You do not need the person who received those things to validate their existence. And perhaps this is the point where your heart begins to resist. Because part of you may still be waiting for them to understand. You may want them to look back and say, "You really did everything for me." You may want them to recognize the sacrifices you made. You may want them to apologize. You may want them to finally see what they lost. Those desires are human. You do not have to shame yourself for having them. But you also cannot build your future around the possibility that another person will eventually provide the closure they repeatedly refused to give you. Closure is often misunderstood. We imagine closure as one final conversation where everything is explained, every misunderstanding is corrected, every injustice is acknowledged, and the person who hurt us finally says exactly what we needed to hear. Sometimes that happens, but often it does not. Sometimes closure is much quieter. Closure is the moment you stop asking the same person for an answer they have demonstrated they cannot or will not provide. Closure is accepting the pattern even when you never receive the perfect explanation. Closure is saying, I may never fully understand why you treated me this way, but I understand enough to know that I cannot continue living this way. The fourth thing that can happen when you stop giving everything is that the relationship dynamic may suddenly feel unfamiliar. If someone became accustomed to your constant availability, your immediate replies, your emotional labor, your forgiveness, or your willingness to repair every conflict, your withdrawal from that role can change the entire system. This is why boundaries can feel so uncomfortable in the beginning. A boundary is not punishment. A boundary is not revenge. A boundary is not a strategy designed to make another person panic. A boundary is a statement about what you will participate in and what you will do when a particular behavior occurs. For example, instead of saying, you better stop disrespecting me, a boundary might sound like, if the conversation becomes insulting, I will end the conversation and revisit it when it is respectful. The difference is enormous. The first statement attempts to control the other person. The second statement defines your own action. You cannot control whether someone becomes respectful. You can control whether you remain in a conversation where you are being insulted. That is where your power begins to return. No contact can be another form of boundary when it is appropriate and safe. But no contact should not become a psychological game where you constantly monitor whether the other person misses you. If you stop contacting them, but spend every hour checking their social media, asking mutual friends what they are doing, analyzing their profile picture, and wondering whether they are suffering, your body may be physically distant while your mind remains emotionally attached. The goal is not merely to stop messaging. The goal is gradually to stop organizing your emotional life around their reactions. This is one of the most difficult transformations. You can be in no contact and still be emotionally connected. You can block a number and still have an internal conversation with that person every night. You can delete photographs and still replay memories constantly. You can leave the relationship and still spend months trying to prove to yourself that you were right. Healing requires something deeper than physical distance. It requires emotional disengagement from the need to monitor, predict, understand, or influence the other person. Maybe you are thinking, but what if they come back? They may reach out, they may not. Some people displaying narcissistic patterns may attempt to reconnect when they sense that access to another person has been reduced. Sometimes the contact may look affectionate. Sometimes it may look apologetic. Sometimes it may involve nostalgia. Sometimes it may be anger. Sometimes it may be a crisis. Sometimes it may simply be a seemingly innocent message designed to reopen communication. But you do not need to predict their next move. You need to decide what protects your peace. This is an important distinction. Instead of asking, "What does their message mean?" begin asking, "What does responding to this message do to me? Does it pull you back into anxiety? Does it reopen confusion? Does it cause you to abandon your boundary? Does it restart the same cycle? Or is there genuine evidence of sustained accountability, changed behavior, and respect?" Words can be meaningful, but behavior over time is usually much more informative. A single apology does not automatically establish transformation. Real change, when it occurs, tends to involve consistent behavior, accountability, respect for boundaries, and willingness to tolerate consequences. The fifth thing that can happen is that you begin seeing your own role differently. This does not mean blaming yourself for being mistreated. There is a crucial difference between responsibility and self-blame. You are not responsible for someone else's decision to manipulate, deceive, demean, or exploit you. But you can become responsible for what you choose next. You can ask, "Why did I tolerate this for so long?" Not to attack yourself, but to understand yourself. What did you believe love required? Did you believe leaving meant failure? Did you believe being needed meant being loved? Did you confuse forgiveness with unlimited access? Did you believe your worth increased when you were indispensable to someone? These questions can be painful, but they are powerful. Because once you understand the beliefs that kept you stuck, you can change them. Maybe you learned that being a good person means always giving another chance. Now you can learn that compassion and boundaries can coexist. Maybe you learned that saying no is selfish. Now you can learn that saying no can be an act of self-respect. Maybe you learned that other people's disappointment means you have done something wrong. Now you can learn that someone can be disappointed in your boundary while your boundary is still healthy. The sixth thing that can happen is that your nervous system may finally begin to experience the quiet it has been missing. Emotional abuse and chronic relational conflict can leave people hypervigilant. You may have become accustomed to checking someone's facial expression, tone, texting patterns, silence, or mood. You may have constantly wondered whether something was wrong. You may have learned to expect the emotional atmosphere to change without warning. When that environment disappears, peace can initially feel strange. Some people even mistake peace for loneliness because they have become so accustomed to emotional intensity. Think about that. If you lived for a long time in emotional chaos, calm may initially feel empty. You may think, "Why don't I feel excited?" But maybe you are not supposed to feel constantly excited anymore. Maybe your body is learning what safety feels like. Maybe you are learning that love does not have to be a roller coaster. Maybe you are learning that someone not responding immediately does not automatically mean you are being abandoned. Maybe you are learning that disagreement does not have to become emotional warfare. Maybe you are learning that you can sleep without wondering whether you will wake up to an angry message. Healing can feel boring at first because chaos trained your attention to look for danger. Give yourself time. Your life does not need to be dramatic to be meaningful. Your relationships do not need to be unpredictable to be passionate. You do not need to earn affection through suffering. You do not need to prove your loyalty by tolerating pain. And this brings us to the seventh thing. Eventually, the question changes. In the beginning, you may ask, why did they do this to me? Then you may ask, will they ever realize what they did? Then perhaps, will they come back? But healing eventually brings you to a different question. What do I want my life to look like now? That is the question that changes everything, because your future cannot be built entirely around understanding your past. There comes a moment when the investigation has to end. You have studied the messages. You have analyzed the conversations. You have watched videos. You have read about narcissism. You have compared behaviors. You have tried to understand the psychology. And education can be incredibly valuable because it gives language to experiences that once felt impossible to explain. But there is a point where more information stops helping and begins keeping you emotionally connected. You do not need to spend the rest of your life studying someone who hurt you. You are allowed to study yourself now. Study what makes you feel alive. Study what you stopped doing while you were trying to keep the relationship together. Study the dreams you postponed. Study the friendships you neglected. Study the boundaries you never learned to express. Study the version of yourself that existed before you started questioning every decision. Study the person you are becoming now, because perhaps the most beautiful part of healing is realizing that the person who gave everything did not disappear. That person is still inside you. The compassion is still there. The capacity to love is still there. The generosity is still there. But now you are learning to include yourself in the circle of people you care for. You are learning that giving everything to another person should never require abandoning yourself. You are learning that love without boundaries can become self-abandonment. You are learning that forgiveness does not require reconciliation. You are learning that understanding someone's wounds does not require volunteering to become their target. You are learning that empathy without discernment can leave you vulnerable. And you are learning that kindness is strongest when it includes wisdom. Maybe you have spent months wondering whether you were too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding, too caring, too available, too loyal. But perhaps the more useful question is whether you were trying to receive emotional safety from someone who was not consistently offering it. That distinction matters. You do not have to become less emotional. You may need to become more discerning about who receives access to your emotions. You do not have to become less loving. You may need to become more selective about where your love is invested. You do not have to stop trusting people. You may need to trust gradually, based on patterns rather than promises. You do not have to harden your heart. You need to strengthen your boundaries around it. And if you are currently in the stage where you still miss them, please hear this. Missing someone does not mean you should return to them. Missing the familiar is not the same as missing the healthy. Your nervous system can miss what your mind knows was harmful. You can miss their voice and still know that the relationship was damaging. You can remember beautiful moments without rewriting the painful ones. You can love someone and still decide that access to you is no longer healthy. Healing does not require you to hate them. In fact, hatred can sometimes keep you connected just as intensely as love. If your entire identity becomes, I hate this person, they are still occupying emotional space inside you. The goal is not hatred. The goal is indifference, peace, clarity, and freedom. Eventually, you want their name to become information rather than an emotional emergency. That may take time. Give yourself time. Do not compare your healing to someone else's. There is no universal timeline. Some people leave and feel immediate relief. Others experience grief weeks or months later. Some people become angry first. Others become sad. Some experience guilt. Some feel numb. Some feel all of these emotions in the same day. Healing is not always a straight line. A difficult morning does not erase the progress you made yesterday. There may be days when you feel strong and days when you feel pulled backward. On those days, do not ask, why am I still affected? Ask, what does this emotion need from me? Maybe it needs rest. Maybe it needs expression. Maybe it needs a conversation with someone safe. Maybe it needs you to step away from social media. Maybe it needs you to remind yourself of why you created distance in the first place. And if you find yourself romanticizing the relationship, remember to look at the whole picture. The mind often remembers emotional highs more vividly than chronic emotional exhaustion. You may remember the night they held you, but forget the weeks you spent anxious. You may remember the apology, but forget how many apologies came before it. You may remember their kindness, but forget the conditions attached to it. You may remember how intensely they wanted you, but forget how often you felt unseen. Do not punish yourself for remembering the good. Just refuse to let the good erase the truth. You can hold two truths at once. There were moments you loved, and there were patterns that hurt you. There were beautiful memories, and there were unacceptable behaviors. You cared about them, and you can still choose yourself. You can wish them well from a distance without giving them access to your life. This is emotional maturity. One of the hardest lessons after narcissistic abuse is that you cannot heal by winning the argument. You can prove your point and still feel empty. You can gather evidence and still want their validation. You can explain every contradiction and still wonder why they behaved that way. The goal is not to become the perfect prosecutor of your own past. The goal is to become the protector of your future. That means you stop asking, how can I make them understand? And begin asking, how can I understand myself? Why did I ignore that first warning sign? Why did I accept that apology without changed behavior? Why did I keep explaining what respect meant? Why did I believe I had to earn basic consideration? Why did I become afraid of disappointing someone who repeatedly disappointed me? These questions are not invitations to shame yourself. They are invitations to reclaim your agency. Maybe you were raised to be accommodating. Maybe you learned early that keeping peace was more important than expressing your needs. Maybe you became accustomed to taking responsibility for other people's emotions. Maybe you thought being needed was the same as being loved. Whatever the reason, you can learn something different now. You can learn that healthy relationships allow you to be a person, not a service provider. You can learn that someone else's emotional discomfort does not automatically become your emergency. You can learn that no is a complete sentence. You can learn that you do not have to explain a boundary 15 times. You can learn that respect is not something you negotiate endlessly. You can learn that consistency matters more than intensity. You can learn that peace is not boring. And you can learn that love should not repeatedly require you to betray yourself. If you are currently considering no contact, remember that the purpose should be your healing and safety, not controlling the other person's reaction. Do not create a secret scoreboard where you count how many days have passed and imagine what they must be feeling. Do not make every silence into evidence that they are suffering. Do not turn healing into another way of monitoring them. Your freedom begins when their emotional state stops being your project. If they miss you, that is theirs. If they do not miss you, that is theirs. If they move on, that is theirs. If they contact you, you decide what is healthy for you. If they never contact you again, you can still build a beautiful life. You are not waiting for their reaction. You are creating your response. And perhaps this is the deepest shift of all. You spent so long reacting to their behavior that you forgot you could design your own life. Their mood determined your mood. Their silence determined your anxiety. Their affection determined your hope. Their criticism determined your self-doubt. Their approval determined your confidence. Now you begin reversing that equation. Your mood becomes your responsibility. Your boundaries become your responsibility. Your healing becomes your responsibility. Your future becomes your responsibility, not because you caused what happened, but because you deserve to reclaim what happens next. There is a difference between responsibility and blame. Blame looks backward and says, "This is your fault." Responsibility looks forward and says, "This is now in my hands." You can reject blame while embracing responsibility. You can say, "I did not deserve what happened to me, and I will still take responsibility for protecting myself from repeating it." That is strength. You may eventually notice that you no longer need to tell everyone your story. At first, you may need to explain it because you are trying to make sense of it. Later, you may become tired of explaining. That can be progress. You may realize that you do not need every person to agree with your interpretation. You do not need to convince the people who never saw what happened privately. You do not need to defend your boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. Some people will say, "But they seemed so nice." You can respond internally. They did not experience what I experienced. Some people may say, "Maybe you should give them another chance." You can think, "I gave enough chances to understand the pattern." Some people may say, "Why can't you just forgive?" You can say, "Forgiveness and access are different things. You are allowed to protect your peace, even when other people do not understand why." And if children, shared finances, work, family responsibilities, or other unavoidable connections mean that complete no contact is impossible, emotional boundaries can still matter. You may need limited contact, structured communication, written communication, or support from appropriate professionals. The goal is not to follow an internet formula. The goal is to find the safest and healthiest structure for your circumstances. There is no prize for suffering more. You do not have to prove your strength by staying in a situation that continually breaks you down. Sometimes strength is leaving. Sometimes strength is staying temporarily while preparing safely. Sometimes strength is asking for help. Sometimes strength is documenting important interactions. Sometimes strength is saying nothing. Sometimes strength is walking away from the argument. Sometimes strength is blocking the number. Sometimes strength is refusing to block someone because practical responsibility require communication, but learning to respond without emotional engagement. Strength does not always look dramatic. Often, strength looks like a quiet decision you make when nobody is watching. I will not abandon myself anymore. Let that sentence become important to you. I will not abandon myself anymore. I will not explain myself endlessly to someone committed to misunderstanding me. I will not confuse potential with reality. I will not confuse apologies with transformation. I will not mistake chemistry for compatibility. I will not mistake intensity for intimacy. I will not mistake being needed for being loved. I will not measure my worth through someone else's capacity to appreciate me. And I will not spend the rest of my life trying to prove that I deserved better. I will simply choose better. That is where self-respect begins. Self-respect is not believing you are better than everyone else. It is believing that your needs, feelings, time, and dignity matter too. It is understanding that you are not required to earn the right to be treated well. You should not have to become perfect to deserve respect. You should not have to become silent to deserve peace. You should not have to become endlessly forgiving to deserve love. You should not have to tolerate disrespect to prove that you are compassionate. You should not have to destroy yourself to demonstrate loyalty. And perhaps you need to hear this most of all. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to stop explaining. You are allowed to stop chasing You are allowed to stop proving. You are allowed to stop waiting. You are allowed to stop rescuing. You are allowed to stop checking. You are allowed to stop hoping for a version of someone that repeatedly exists only in your imagination. And when you stop, you may discover that there is an enormous amount of life waiting on the other side of that energy. There are friendships waiting. There are dreams waiting. There are mornings when you will wake up without dread. There are conversations where you will not have to defend your feelings. There are relationships where someone can hear, "That hurt me," without turning it into an attack against you. There are people who will not require you to shrink in order to stay. There are people who will appreciate your kindness without exploiting it. There are people who will respect your boundaries without treating your boundaries as betrayal. There is a life beyond survival. You may not see the entire life yet. That is okay. You only need to take the next step. Today, perhaps the next step is deleting the conversation. Tomorrow, perhaps it is going for a walk. The next day, perhaps it is reconnecting with someone you trust. Perhaps it is therapy. Perhaps it is journaling. Perhaps it is sleeping without your phone beside you. Perhaps it is returning to a hobby. Perhaps it is cleaning your room. Perhaps it is applying for the opportunity you abandoned. Healing does not always arrive as one giant transformation. Sometimes it arrives through tiny decisions repeated until your life becomes different. And one day, you may notice something remarkable. You will have a good day without thinking about them, then another, then another. And eventually, you will realize that you went several hours without wondering what they were doing. Then you will go a whole day, then perhaps a week. And one morning, you will wake up and realize that your first thought is no longer them. That is freedom, not because they lost, because you return to yourself. This is why I want you to be careful about making your healing dependent on the narcissistic person's downfall. You may see content online promising that they will suffer, collapse, regret everything, or become obsessed with your absence. Be cautious with certainty like that. Human behavior is complicated. You cannot know exactly what another person feels privately, and you do not need to know. Building your healing around their suffering keeps your attention pointed toward them. Instead, build your healing around your own recovery. Let your success be that you sleep peacefully. Let your success be that you trust your instincts again. Let your success be that you stop apologizing for reasonable needs. Let your success be that you recognize manipulation earlier. Let your success be that you no longer confuse anxiety with love. Let your success be that you can walk away without needing to destroy the person you are leaving. Let your success be that you become emotionally available to healthy people because you are no longer consumed by an unhealthy dynamic. Let your success be peace. There is something incredibly powerful about becoming a person who no longer needs to be chosen by someone who repeatedly failed to choose you properly. You begin choosing yourself. And choosing yourself does not mean you become selfish. It means you stop making self-neglect the price of being loved. Think about how different your future can become when you stop asking, "How much can I tolerate?" and start asking, "What kind of relationship allows me to thrive?" That question changes your standards. You begin looking for consistency. You begin looking for emotional responsibility. You begin noticing how someone handles disappointment. You watch whether their apology is followed by behavioral change. You observe whether they respect small boundaries. You pay attention to whether they can celebrate your success without making it about themselves. You notice whether they can disagree without humiliating you. You notice whether they can admit, "I was wrong." You notice whether they are curious about your inner world. You stop being impressed solely by charm. You begin valuing character. That is one of the greatest gifts that can come from painful experience. Not because the pain was necessary or deserved, but because you can choose to transform what you learned into wisdom. You can become more discerning without becoming cynical. You can become more careful without becoming closed. You can become more independent without becoming emotionally unavailable. You can become more boundaried without becoming cruel. You can become more self-protective without losing your compassion. You do not need to become the opposite of the person who hurt you. You need to become a healthier version of yourself. Maybe you once gave everything because you thought love was measured by how much you could endure. Now you can measure love differently, by safety, by consistency, by mutuality, by respect, by honesty, by emotional responsibility. And if someone cannot offer those things consistently, you do not have to hate them. You simply do not have to stay. That sentence may save you years of pain. You do not have to stay. You do not need permission to leave an unhealthy dynamic. You do not need a unanimous vote from friends and family. You do not need the other person to agree that the relationship was unhealthy. You do not need a courtroom-level case proving your pain. You need to listen to what repeated experience is telling you. If your body is constantly anxious, if your confidence keeps disappearing, if you are always afraid of their reaction, if you are repeatedly being disrespected, if communication never leads to accountability, if your boundaries are consistently ignored, those experiences matter. Listen. Not every relationship problem means you must leave. Healthy relationships involve conflict, mistakes, misunderstandings, and repair. But healthy repair requires participation from both people. If only one person is constantly apologizing, changing, explaining, and repairing while the other person repeatedly causes harm and refuses responsibility, the relationship becomes fundamentally imbalanced. You cannot carry a relationship for two people forever. You cannot do both sides of emotional work, and you should not have to. If you are the only one trying to save the relationship, eventually you may need to save yourself instead. And maybe this is where your story changes. Not because the past changes, not because they suddenly become the person you wanted, not because they send the perfect message, not because they finally admit everything. Your story changes because you stop giving the past permission to control the future. You begin walking forward, slowly, imperfectly, courageously. You may cry while walking forward. You may miss them while walking forward. You may doubt yourself while walking forward. Walk anyway. Healing does not require certainty. It requires direction. And if you fall back emotionally for a day, that does not mean you have returned to the beginning. You are still carrying everything you learned. You are still becoming stronger. You are still learning yourself. There is no shame in needing support. If the experience has left you deeply distressed, a qualified mental health professional can provide support tailored to your situation. You do not have to navigate complicated relational trauma alone. Sometimes healing requires more than motivational words. It requires a safe relationship in which you can process what happened without being judged. And there is no weakness in that. Asking for help is not admitting that you are broken. It is recognizing that you deserve support while rebuilding. So if you gave someone everything and they hurt you, I want you to stop using their behavior as evidence against yourself. Their cruelty does not prove you were foolish. Their rejection does not prove you were unlovable. Their manipulation does not prove you were weak. Their inability to reciprocate does not prove you were too much. Their lack of accountability does not mean your pain was imaginary. And their decision to leave does not determine your future. You are still here. That matters. You are still capable of learning. That matters. You are still capable of loving. That matters. You are still capable of building a different life. That matters. Perhaps the person who gave everything needs to learn something now. You deserve to give something to yourself. Give yourself the patience you gave them. Give yourself the forgiveness you gave them. Give yourself the compassion you gave them. Give yourself the second chances you gave them. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Give yourself rest. Give yourself boundaries. Give yourself protection. Give yourself permission to become someone who no longer negotiates with disrespect. You spent so much time asking whether they would change. Now ask what you can change within yourself. Not because you caused their behavior, because you control your next chapter. Maybe you can change the people you give immediate access to. Maybe you can change how quickly you trust. Maybe you can change how you respond to early disrespect. Maybe you can change the belief that love requires endless endurance. Maybe you can change the belief that leaving means failure. Maybe you can change the habit of abandoning your own needs whenever someone becomes upset. These changes can become the foundation of a completely different future. And one day, someone may meet you and wonder why you are so calm. They may not understand that your calm was built through storms. They may see your boundaries and think you are confident. They may not know how difficult it was to learn to say no. They may see you walking away from disrespect and think you are strong. They may not know how many years you spent begging yourself to stay. They may see you choosing peace and never know that chaos once felt like love. But you will know what it took, and that knowledge will make your future precious. You will no longer take peace for granted. You will no longer mistake anxiety for chemistry. You will no longer chase people who make you question whether you matter. You will no longer confuse emotional intensity with emotional intimacy. You will no longer believe that being chosen by someone else is the highest form of validation because you will know something deeper. You chose yourself. And that choice is not made once. You make it every day. When you refuse to answer the manipulative message, you choose yourself. When you leave the disrespectful conversation, you choose yourself. When you stop checking their social media, you choose yourself. When you call a trusted friend instead of returning to an unhealthy dynamic, you choose yourself. When you go to therapy, you choose yourself. When you rest, you choose yourself. When you pursue your goals again, you choose yourself. When you laugh without guilt, you choose yourself. When you fall in love with your own life again, you choose yourself. This is what empowerment really looks like. Not becoming powerful over someone else. Becoming powerful within yourself, not making someone regret losing you. Becoming someone who no longer regrets leaving what was hurting you. Not proving that you were the better person. Becoming the person you respect when you look in the mirror. Not waiting for them to validate your pain. Validating your own experience, not demanding that they understand your boundaries. Living according to them. And eventually, the question will no longer be, why did a narcissistic person hurt someone who gave them everything? The question will become, why did I ever believe that giving everything meant I had to lose myself? And when you can answer that question with compassion rather than shame, you will know that something has changed. You will understand that your love was not the mistake. The mistake was believing love required self-abandonment. Your heart was not the problem. The problem was giving your heart unlimited access to someone who did not consistently handle it with care. Your generosity was not weakness. Your generosity simply needed boundaries. Your empathy was not foolishness. Your empathy needed discernment. Your loyalty was not something to be ashamed of. Your loyalty needed to be offered where loyalty was reciprocated. You do not have to become less of who you are. You have to stop giving the best parts of yourself to people who repeatedly use those parts against you. So let this be the moment you stop asking whether you were enough for them. Ask whether the relationship was enough for you. Let this be the moment you stop asking whether they will regret hurting you. Ask what you will do to prevent yourself from being hurt the same way again. Let this be the moment you stop waiting for their closure. Begin creating your own. Let this be the moment you stop measuring your worth by whether they return. Measure your worth by whether you return to yourself. And if you are standing in the middle of that pain right now, I want you to breathe. You do not have to solve your entire life tonight. You do not have to know exactly what happens next. You do not have to stop missing them immediately. You do not have to feel strong every day. You only need to take the next healthy step. One step, then another, then another. Eventually, the distance between who you were and who you are becoming will become enormous. And you will look back with compassion, not contempt. You will not say, "How could I have been so stupid?" You will say, "I was trying to love someone. I was trying to make the relationship work. I was trying to believe in the best. I did what I knew how to do, and now I know more." That is growth. You were not stupid for loving. You were learning. You were not weak for staying. You were trying to survive and make sense of something complicated, and now you are learning to protect yourself. That is strength. So when a narcissist hurts someone who gave them everything, there may be pain, confusion, grief, anger, and an enormous period of self-questioning. But that is not where the story has to end. The story can move toward clarity. It can move toward boundaries. It can move toward emotional detachment. It can move toward self-respect. It can move toward a life in which your kindness is no longer something people can automatically access simply because you have a big heart. You can remain compassionate without remaining available to harm. You can remain loving without returning to the same cycle. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can understand someone's psychology without excusing their behavior. You can wish them healing without making their healing your responsibility. You can remember the relationship without returning to it. And most importantly, you can love yourself without needing anyone else to approve of that decision. Your life is bigger than the person who hurt you. Your identity is bigger than the relationship that wounded you. Your future is bigger than the chapter that broke you. There is still laughter ahead. There is still peace ahead. There are still friendships ahead. There are still opportunities ahead. There are still mornings when you will feel grateful that you chose yourself. There are still moments when you will realize that the life you were afraid to live without them is actually the life you were meant to build for yourself.